In the United States, we've never developed a civilization or anything like one, so there are no agreed-upon set of values. This is why everybody's so crooked. That's why you'll forgive me as a nation of shoplifters.
Of yourself, you have written that you are, at heart, quote, a propagandist, a tremendous hater, a tiresome nag.
He is a novelist. He's written for Broadway, television, a dramatist, screenwriter, was a congressional candidate, been an actor, political debater.
The public image of Vidal is that he's this nasty, witty, shrewd, contemptuous fellow who's shaking a finger at Americans.
To meet Gore is always to be on your toes. He always has some comment to make. Very often, it's not all that comfortable. You know, he loves that sort of thing with you, so it's like a game.
He's shameless in intellectual argument. He's absolutely without character, a moral foundation, or even intellectual substance.
He is so good an entertainer, both on and off the page, that may at times get in the way of what he's achieved in his writing.
Gore Vidal's reputation among scholars is of an agent provocateur. He's a lively, witty mind, but very much enslaved by certain prejudices.
Vidal has always, I think, seen himself as a sort of a troublemaker at large, poking with his pen anybody who gets in his way. It's not about being popular. It's about expressing your opinions as sharp as they may be and being talked about.
His honesty is just unbelievable. He just doesn't, he's unable to not tell the truth.
We have a country where everything's broken down. Well, I think there should be voices, nags like me. I live in Italy because I'm left alone. Ravello is a perfect place in which to both read and write. So it is a serene place to survey the past, one's own and that of one's country. I suppose there is an element of paradox that I am probably the most American novelist of my time. And I mean that in the sense that my subject is the United States. I'm interested in the fate of the country and the civilization to which I belong. Here in 200 years, we created a world empire out of a really interesting mix of people, many of whom were considered the refuse of Europe and other continents. And yet somehow something about coming together in this place gave us energy. Well, that to me is a story. The reason I write these books, it's the United States of amnesia. You know, you've got to remind that we had a past.
But you're giving a different version of that past.
Yes, because the court historians have totally blurred everything. The latest book on Aaron Burr accepts my theory about the charge by Hamilton of incest against Burr and his daughter Theodosia. And then I took a lot of flack in '73 over Jefferson and Sally Hemings. Dumas Malone attacked me and said my view of Jefferson was subversive and that no gentleman would ever go to bed with a slave. As Mr. Jefferson was the greatest gentleman in the United States, he could never have had an affair with Sally Hemings. So upon a false syllogism, false history is built.
When was the inevitability of being a writer apparent to you? As a young man at school?
My grandfather was blind at the age of 10, and his wife had read to him through his whole career, and he had secretaries in his Senate days, and then he found out that I liked to read, so I learned to read at about 6 or 7. And by 8 or 9, when he was home, I was on duty. It was the greatest education you could have to be a writer. Mind you, we did a lot of the Congressional Record. I was the only 10-year-old who understood bimetallism. My grandfather He was born in 1870. I was born in 1925. And we lived in the same house, and between the two of us, we had lived through half the history of our republic.
What were your family's expectations for you? And how much did you think about those expectations?
I don't know that they were fulfilled. My grandfather had narrowly missed being vice president. He was in the Senate. I was brought up by him. So he thought that I might follow that route. I wanted to follow that route. But I was born a writer, and you can't do both. A writer must always tell the truth as he sees it. And a politician must never give the game away. These are two conflicting drives. Since I first moved to Washington when I was 3 months old in 1925, that has been the center of my family's world and my world. Often, my grandfather would use me as his page, and I would lead him on the floor of the Senate. If there's an empty chair near him, I'd sit and hear the debates.
The last war cost 10 million lives. I was one of 7 senators who opposed our entering the war. That cost me my seat in the Senate. But I tell you, mothers, now, as I told you then, that I will never rob your cradles to feed the dogs of war.
And take him into the cloakroom where the real politics went on, where the senators would get together and plot. And I was very much aware that I was in the engine room of the Republic. The senators were wonderful actors, and they gave very good value. Each had his own act. The best of all was Huey Long from Louisiana. He and my grandfather were great friends, and he'd come to the house, and he'd just be talking about, I want you to hear my vision for America. And I'm going to say to that son of a bitch Roosevelt, I'm going to get his head. And he would be doing this at the breakfast table at the Gores, and my grandfather adored listening to him, and I was just fascinated by it. Then you go down to the Senate and you hear the same speech he'd been rehearsing.
The Lord has answered the prayer. He has called the barbecue. Come to my feast. He said to 125 million American people.
I had the luck to have intersected with history itself, watching Roosevelt when he drove down Pennsylvania Avenue after he had been inaugurated. And there he was in an open car waving his hat. And he was such a presence. And one knew this was the center of the world. In the 30s, all those tempos were going up. My grandfather and I used to take walks. I'd have to describe, now what are they doing over there? He'd always sigh and say, oh, they'll make the most wonderful ruins. He saw Washington, D.C. as just another Rome shattered to pieces.
As you embark upon doing what cannot be called a court history, and doing it in fictional form, and I don't know whether it is you or others who call it your American Chronicles.
I call it Narratives of Empire.
Narratives of Empire. Why did you not consider doing it as more classic sense of history?
I think classic history in the United States has got a very bad rep, deservedly. So I thought a novel would be more realistic and true.
Do you remember how early it was that you conceived such a project?
Well, I wrote a book in '67 called Washington, D.C., about a family who was involved in politics and lives here, and Roosevelt is in the background, but a constant presence. The war is coming. And then when I finished it, I got very curious. I said, how on earth did we really get into that war? And I knew how he pulled it off, but what's it all about? So I thought, I'll go back to the beginning. So in 1972 or 3, I wrote Burr, which takes me back to the Revolution and back to the one dissenting founding father, the one who found the others sort of ridiculous. Burr was attractive because I can show these other people as he viewed them.
I see.
He left a lot of diaries and a lot of interviews, many letters, and he was wonderfully funny. And the other founding fathers were of such pomposity. And they were constantly, they knew they had founded a new nation. It was going to be Rome. And then they make the capital here. This mock Roman thing that even at MGM, when I worked there, we wouldn't have done anything as awful as some of these buildings. But they were all posing for history. I knew all along that Burr had had a bad rap. His two main enemies were Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. He picked his enemies so well that he erased himself from American history. So I thought, I think I'll focus on Burr, because he has a very odd, different view of the founding fathers.
When Gore Vidal's book was released, there was anger that this was depicting the founders in such a horrible light, and in some way or another was sort of throwing sand in the face of, Americans and their view of the founders, was sort of polluting something that should be really held up. In the national myth of the founding period, Burr is the villain. He is the bad guy. As a historian, there is no way you're going to get the capital T truth about anything. But I was actually surprised to see how often the conversations in the book are actual conversations. People like Thomas Jefferson often recorded their conversations, which is wonderful for historians. But when you know those conversations, it actually was really quite striking the number of times that I would think, wow, in this book it's really almost disturbing the way this conversation's unfolding. But I know for a fact that those are the words that were exchanged. What's being added here is the sort of emotion and the response and what it would have been like to be in that conversation, which in a way makes it, even for a historian, sort of shocking when you think, ooh, yeah, what would it have felt like to be Burr when Jefferson says X?
Jefferson held out his finger, and the mockingbird lit upon it and whistled. I confess, Mr. Jefferson, that I find it most remarkable, most strange, that you are not able to confide any task to the man who raised you to this place. The fierce old mouth set. The hands fell to the table. The bird fled and perched on the mantel opposite. It was the people, Colonel Burr, who did me this honor. No, sir. It was Aaron Burr who gave you your victory in New York State. And it was Aaron Burr who could have taken the presidency from you had he but said the word. But you did not say that word, Mr. Burr, and here I am. Like an axe, his malice fell upon me, and we were done with one another. I rose to go. I wonder what the world would think if they were to know all the arrangements you made in order to become president. It is too late to change what is now the accepted version of our revolution. Jefferson put the mockingbird back inside its cage.
So Burr was the realist. And realists are always hated, particularly in a sanctimonious society of hustlers, which is what the United States has been from the beginning, where the first law is, I won't blow your scam, you don't blow mine.
I show the dark side of Jefferson, and rather the bright side of Hamilton. It is quite true that they had bad sides to them, but gosh, they were bright. And when you compare those people to Nixon or Kennedy or Humphrey or any of these people who actually have no idea what they're doing except running for office. After they set up the United States, they set it up really, that pursuit of happiness was rather a dangerous phrase, though it also has its good side. But we became really the greediest society on earth, killing the Indians, grabbing lands, picking wars with other countries, conquering. And the society really was based on me. So all the bright people went into business. And they left then, why become a senator when you can buy one,
With a grandfather who was interested in history, had made history, you become immediately conscious that you yourself are trapped in it. You have your place. Well, I first came to Rome in 1939. It was a dream come true. Everything in my life had prepared me for Rome. All my reading, quite a few movies. I felt I was home. I was with a bunch of schoolboys from St. Albans, and one night we went to the opera. in the ruins of the baths of Caracalla. And Mussolini was over to our left, wearing a white uniform. Very preoccupied. I've looked up what was going on that day, and he'd been receiving some very unpleasant orders from Hitler and didn't know quite how to respond to them. But he lasted for the first act. Then he got up to go down on stage and salute the audience. I was overwhelmed by the amount of perfume that he was wearing as he went by me. It was a hot August night. And I thought that was rather decadent. As war clouds gathered, they got us on what was the last train before they shut the border between Italy and France. It was like a movie, but I'd seen a lot of better movies than this one that I was in. It did get interesting and a little bit scary as we approached the border. The black shirts, the fascist police came through to look at our passports. They pretended to stare at them and scowl. Luckily, I had something or other written in mind to say that I was an official child. So we were let through without any problem. I was headed for politics, and of course it was the great debate was going on, America First. And I was the head of America First at Exeter, and the school was 90% for intervention on the side of England. So we isolationists had a rather hard time of it there. It meant a lot of debating, and a real debating. Are we to become the world empire? Or do we mind our own business and try to achieve a civilization? Unfortunately, we picked empire. We've never had a democracy or anything close to one, nor were we intended. The founding fathers feared democracy and they feared monarchy. So they wanted a republic where it was safe for white men of business to do business. One of the things that you people in the media do is make it seem as if the individual who becomes president is of any importance to the governance of the United States. The second you forget about him and start worrying about General Motors and General Electric and Northrop and Lockheed, then you'll be getting at where power is. They own the Congresses, they own the presidents, they own the single party with two right wings, Republican and Democratic.
Why put so much of your mental effort at this point in your life into reading about American politics?
My subject is the United States. My family helped found this country, and I have a personal, familial feeling about it. I hate what has been done to it. And very few people say what I say, because very few people have the long perspective I do, due to the year of my birth, and the fact that I've spent my life studying American history and world history, politics. I know how the country's run. I come from the governing class. And I turned against it because I thought it was stupid, frankly, to disenfranchise so many people.
Vidal is one of the few voices in recent American history who quite unabashedly has come from the top. Someone who's in the corridors of power. And usually there's an equation in American politics. The more access you have, the less you're able to reveal. And Vidal has turned that upside down.
Good to see you. I'm glad to shake your hand.
We've heard from politicians, we've heard from social critics, we've heard from activists, but we haven't heard from a historian, we haven't heard from a novelist, we haven't heard from a playwright. So it's a special pleasure to be able to introduce a historian. And although he didn't get any fancy degrees at doing it, for my money, he is one of, if not the best historians writing in the United States today. Writing history in the guise of being a novelist. And he has written, believe it or not, 23 novels. The only thing one doesn't think of when one thinks of Gore Vidal is we don't think of a yes man. Exactly. But the truth is, Vidal has been saying yes to Nation editors who have been asking him to write for that magazine for the last 50 years. So I'm pleased, privileged, proud to present the best man, Gore Vidal himself.
Recently, another magazine keeps asking me to write for them. Modern Maturity. And they asked, would you write a letter to the next president of the United States, whoever he might be? So this is what I've done. Mr. President, if you're going to be of any use to us at all, the nation or the globe that it uneasily holds hostage, you will have to tame the American military. 50 years ago, Harry Truman replaced the old republic with a national security state whose sole purpose is to wage, as the historian Charles Beard put it, perpetual war for perpetual peace. Although we regularly stigmatize other societies as rogue states, we ourselves have become the largest rogue state of all. We honor no treaties. We spurn international courts. We strike unilaterally wherever we choose. We bomb, invade, subvert other states. Although we, the people of the United States, are the sole source of legitimate authority in this land, we are no longer represented in Congress assembled. Our Congress has been hijacked by corporate America and its enforcer, the imperial military machine. So, Mr. President, if you want to make some difference, start now to rein in the warlords. Be like Teddy Roosevelt. The bosses of New York said, we bought him, but he didn't stay bought. Use your first term to break the Pentagon. Forget about a second term. Because should you succeed on the other side of the Potomac, you will be a hero to we the people. Should you fail, or worse, do nothing, you could be the last president, by which time history will have ceased to notice the United States, and all our proud rhetoric will have been reduced to an ever-diminishing echo. Let us try not to let this happen.
Run, Gore, run. You have said this country is the United States of amnesia. Not after that speech.
I think Gore Vidal, to do him justice, he's been deeply disappointed in America. I think he thinks that the United States started out very promisingly, but in the course of time, it's been corrupted by big business, by imperialistic aspirations, by demagoguery. But the United States has never been really an imperial power in the sense that Britain, France, or Rome were. In other words, they were colonizing powers. We were basically isolationist in political terms, and it requires only the sense that the Republic is in danger to get us interested in the outside world.
He lives in Italy, or most of the time in Italy, and I guess if you live there, you've got a very interesting perspective about your country. You sort of sit apart from it, and you can... Some people think it's very dangerous to live outside your country and talk about your country because you don't, you're getting it all through a sort of a sieve. You're not really part of it. But perhaps he has a better view being there.
Well, we've grown up now with 3 generations of Ravello, and they couldn't have been nicer to us. From the very beginning, I mean, 2 strange, eccentric, crazy Americans driving into town in a silver Jaguar with a little Australian terrier yapping, wearing cowboy hats. I mean, they thought we were, well, they kind of loved it, you see. And Gore has, besides the gift of writing, the gift of verbally communicating. He's an educator, which is really what's behind his art. I mean, his style is unsurpassable in today's world. And he has charisma. Don't forget his family background just brought all those things together in him. So, I see. Buongiorno, Nando. Come sta? Luigi.
Allora dobbiamo aspettare che va via la televisione. Così va via anche la nebbia.
thing about village life is we mind everybody else's business, except our own. 30 years ago, I said to myself, I don't care what the house is like. At the end of this cypress alley, I want it. I was never a lonely child. I was solitary and wanted no company at all other than books and movies and my own imagination. I got on a Shakespeare kick when I was 10 years old and saw Midsummer Night's Dream in the Reinhardt version made by MGM starring Mickey Rooney as Puck. And Mickey Rooney promptly became my role model. And I wanted more than anything on earth to be not just a movie star, but to be Mickey Rooney. He could fly. Well, I could fly too. I took off and landed an airplane at the age of 10. My father was director of air commerce, and he was always trying to promote new prototypes of airplanes. This was a Hammond Flivver plane, it was called, and to prove that anybody, that a 10-year-old boy could fly it, he got me out, I think it was at Bowling Field one Sunday. And there is the crew from Pathé News. Flying an airplane was not that big a deal for me, but I wanted to be Mickey Rooney, and here was the start of it. He was a great con man, and he said, you want to be in the movies? You're going to be in the movies. I made a terrible, very bumpy landing. Then I had to face the cameras. And of course, I immediately just dried up. I was terrified. And then I remember months later going to the Belasco Theater to see myself in the newsreel. And there I was, Mickey Rooney at last, and nobody paid any attention.
Well, how about it?
It's easier than learning how to ride a bicycle.
Well, that's good.
The year before my newsreel debut, my life had changed dramatically. My parents divorced. My mother was an alcoholic, which does not make for good temper or easy relations with anybody, but she had enormous charm. My father was far too dominant for her, and he wouldn't quarrel. All she wanted was quarrel. But she was a raging, frustrated figure, and wherever she was, there was terrible trouble, violent scenes and rages. And if you are a natural storyteller, and you're living in a story that you don't enjoy, which was life with Mother, you do tend to rely upon the narratives that you tell yourself. And I'd always had about 4 or 5 serials going in my head with myself as central to those stories. If things got particularly unendurable in my surroundings, it would be like fuel on my inner narratives.
My pen delays, stops. Why write any of this? Why make a record? Answer, habit. To turn life to words is to make life yours to do with as you please, instead of the other way around. Words translate and transmute raw life, make bearable the unbearable. So at the end, as in the beginning, there is only the word. I seem to be making a book of maxims.
I wrote Willowar, my first published novel, when I was 19. At that age, you write about what is your most immediate experience, and being first mate of a ship was.
Gore was instantly sort of a huge figure on the scene at a very young age. And just about that time, Bill Styrne had written Lie Down in Darkness, and Norman had come out with his novel about the war, and James Jones had written his novel about the war, From Here to Eternity. And I remember there was a lot of excitement about this new group of writers coming along, and he was very much at the forefront of all of that. He was the sort of first enfant terrible, and there were always pictures of them sitting down there in the Gotham Book Mart and Life magazine, the new young writers, and there was Gore, very handsome, very possessed, and obviously on his way.
The party for the publication of Willowa was held at the Gotham Book Mart. Those were the days when everyone, it seemed, read, and everyone talked about books, and authors were celebrities. When I was 20 years old, I found myself at a crossroad. If I published my new novel, The City and the Pillar, I would probably never have the political career my grandfather was planning for me.
I think it's hard for us to imagine now, in the early 21st century, what it was in the late 1940s for someone to publish an unapologetic, openly homosexual novel in America.
Well, it was the first novel that had been published in England or America, or anywhere as far as I know, that dealt very openly with homosexuality as being a perfectly normal sexual activity. Until then, all the books that had touched upon this were exotic. If you had a homosexual protagonist, well, you almost never had a protagonist. There'd be a minor character. And it would always be a ballet dancer or a hairdresser or something like that. And it would be somebody quite effeminate. And I was dealing with two all-American boys, two young athletes, one of whom falls in love with the other. And this was very, very shocking.
If ever a period was built for somebody who then went right out and made certain that he could not have a conventional political career, or as it turned out, a conventional literary career, I'd done it. The daily critic of the New York Times had said that he would never read, much less review, a book of mine in the Daily Times, and so 7 of my books went unreviewed. Time and Newsweek followed suit, so I was totally blacked out. So I was driven into television, which they didn't bother to review.
Here is a wonderful script of Gore's, actually, on Dred Scott, the Dred Scott decision. And Gore just did a masterful rewrite on it.
The thing meshes so well. Those justices sitting there coming to certain decisions, it's being echoed across the country. And the Dred Scott decision meant the extension of slavery and suddenly shoved Lincoln into the election. And that's when he made his great speech. He said, you know, a house divided against itself cannot stand.
But what's very interesting, and Gore has caught it so marvelously, is even in the direct transcripts, how some element of personality comes through in terms of the lawyers themselves and the justices. And you see, I think that's going to be fascinating for an actor to play.
TV became my medium, not only as a writer for television plays, but as a performer, as a voice.
It is as natural to be homosexual as it is to be heterosexual. And the difference between a homosexual and a heterosexual is about the difference between somebody who has brown eyes and somebody who has blue eyes.
Who says so?
I say so. It is a completely natural act from the beginning of time.
It was amazing to watch him on television in that golden age of Dick Cavett. I had never heard anyone on television say not so much unmentionable things, but true things. When truth-telling was about the last thing on anyone's mind, it was a very rare thing, and he's never lost it.
He makes people think, re-examine some of their old assumptions. He also irritates a lot of people, and in a democracy, irritants are often useful. And but in general, he's more a popular entertainer than he is a serious commentator.
I never thought I would see the day when an American president would say, "I am not a crook." And I will say he didn't look the camera in the eye. Did you notice the eyes went, I would...
The bad news, prepare yourself. Ronald Reagan's library just burned down. Both books were destroyed. But the real horror, he had not finished coloring the second.
In this book of Vidal's essays that I'm reviewing, there's a wonderful sentence where he says, "It has been a long time since any public figure has openly said anything useful, much less true, even in the relative privacy of the Oval Office." And you read that and you say, gosh, did he just say that? Does he really think that? And then you think, wait, it could be true. Is it true? Can I think of anything that anyone has said, anything useful that a public figure has said in the last 20 years? And maybe you end up agreeing, maybe you end up disagreeing, but one way or another, you set the book down and you start to think and you start to ransack your own mind, and that's one of the wonderful pleasures of Vidal.
Well, I think he's one of the authors we have in this country whom you have to read. Very often you finish reading what you've read and you throw it full speed towards the nearest fireplace in anger. But it's always interesting. It always has a curious, very Vidalish slant to it. He wrote recently about McVeigh, the Oklahoma bomber with whom he'd had a long correspondence, which was interesting enough. But I think that what Gore drew from the correspondence was way off the mark.
Although McVeigh indicated that he had acted in retaliation for what the federal government had done at Waco, there was to be only one story. One man of incredible, innate evil wanted to destroy innocent lives for no reason other than a spontaneous joy in evil-doing. Since McVeigh had been revealed as evil itself, no one was interested in why he had done what he had done.
You are sounding somewhat sympathetic to Mr. McVeigh, are you?
I understand why he did what he did. You know, it was Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. Well, if you don't understand why people do things, you're living in a fog. We're a country in great trouble. We've just seen a president who was elected by all the people denied the presidency by a Supreme Court running amok. Now, come on, things are not going well with us. I think he is an alarm bell. I want to speak ex cathedra. I write an essay, and there I am in the first person. That is my voice. The essay is the moment in which, it comes from the French, essayer, to try. It's an attempt. It's an attempt to get through to another person. Yet what, finally, was the effect of absolute power on 12 representative men? Suetonius makes it quite plain. Disastrous. Caligula was certifiably mad. Nero, who started well, became progressively irrational. Even the stern Tiberius's character weakened. I like to circle the subject before I get my knife out. So I do a lot of circling and setting up and false leads. And I play with the reader. And then I start to move in. And my image, as I start to really hit my subject, I have a sort of inner image that is as though I'm between two gongs, and and I hit one, and then I go back and back, and there's a rhythm that begins as you make your case. Caesar and Augustus were the makers of the Principate, and they represent the naked will to power for its own sake. And though our own society has not much changed from the Roman, we may point with somber pride to Hitler and Stalin. We have nevertheless got so into the habit of dissembling motives, of denying certain dark constants of human behavior, that it is difficult to find a reputable American historian who will acknowledge the crude fact that a Franklin Roosevelt, say, wanted to be president merely to wield power, to be famed, and to be feared. Finally, power is an end in itself, and the instinctive urge to prevail, the most important single human trait, the necessary force without which no city was built, no city destroyed. great to be here in America, on the island of Manhattan.
Everybody is coming to just meet. This is one of the first times that's ever happened.
Isn't it wonderful to be doing your play?
It's the strangest feeling.
But I mean, this is the sort of play that they've been telling me for years. Oh, you can't do that. We don't do those on Broadway anymore.
Yeah.
And here we are, doing it thanks to you.
Well, thanks to Jeffrey, he did it all. I just looked on with wonder when he said he wanted to revive it. The Best Man was first produced on Broadway in 1960, and I haven't changed one line.
Could you write a play about a convention today, given how scripted they are?
Sure. You could really write it. It's better material even than I had in 40 years ago.
The Best Man, ironic title, would be an ironic title for any candidate?
Somewhat my reading. Presidential character is kind of one aspect of the play. The same fun and games go on, the same blackmail, libel, and so on. That's a constant since the start of the Republic. The archetypes were a character somewhat like Adlai Stevenson, high-minded, witty, but a waffler, and a Nixonian character like Senator Cantwell, who will simply do anything, say anything, but is decisive and very bright. And there were great debates over that play when it opened. Hard-driving man, Cantwell, would he make a better president than a thoughtful, moral, high-minded intellectual? Well, people divided right down the middle, with professional politicians tending to prefer the villain.
There's more danger in the president who acts on animal reflex than in one who is willing to reflect before he acts, who has some vestigial moral sense and goes beyond himself. Don't you see, if I start to fight like Cantwell, I lose all meaning.
If you don't start to fight, you are finished. Now, I am here to tell you this. Power is not a toy we give to good children. It is a weapon. And the strong man takes it and he uses it, and I can assure you he don't turn it on himself, nor let another man come at him with a knife that he don't fight back. Well, that knife is at your throat. And if you don't go down there and beat Cantwell to the floor with this very dirty stick, then you got no business in this big league. And bastard or not, I'll help Joe Cantwell take the whole damn world if he wants it, because it's not for you and never will be.
It became clear to me as we read, every single scene is a negotiation played by experts. People don't always say what they mean, but every moment in these plays, everyone has got an agenda. And Gore, thank you for your tremendous reading today. It was an inspiration.
I am a critic, and I write a lot about politics, and I learned, because of my closeness to Jack and Jackie Kennedy, nobody believed a word I had to say about politics, but they said, you're just another Kennedy apologist. Jackie and I had the same stepfather, but we're no relation beyond that. But because I knew Jack, I thought, really, he's got more energy, he's going to be better at this than Stevenson, who was a great waffler. The play, it really was to clear the way for Jack.
Convention fever grips Los Angeles, where the Democrats convene. Partisans of Senator Kennedy radiate the cheer and confidence of the powerful frontrunner who is clearly the man to beat.
So your first convention was in 1940?
Yes. My grandfather and I went, even though it was a Republican convention. He wanted to check it out.
So you're an old hand at convention alia, yes?
Yes, but unfortunately conventions aren't conventions anymore, so it's just sort of commercial.
What's the major change, do you think, in the way...
Money. Who raises the most money is probably going to be the candidate. Aside from the vice presidency, there's really no point, no suspense, and God knows no issues.
As promised, sitting next to me is Gore Vidal. Let's talk a little bit about the last Democratic convention that was held here.
Well, there was a good deal of excitement going on because everybody pretty much knew it was going to be Kennedy. He had done well in the primaries.
It's worth remembering that at that time, it wasn't a guaranteed certainty. When you went into the convention, it was going to win.
The most moving moment in the convention, my neighbor up the Hudson Valley, I was running for Congress that year, upstate New York, and the most moving was my neighbor, Eleanor Roosevelt. She came out, giant of a woman, wearing this messy hat and the hair coming out from all sides of it. "You must not turn your back on Adlai Stevenson." And she gave them such a dressing, the whole, they're like school children, because she felt they were being bought by the great interest. She was for Adlai Stevenson, and he'd waffled around so much that he'd given me material for the play The Best Man by waffling. But she said, this is a tragedy, to turn to somebody untried, somebody whose politics are perhaps not those of our party. And there was just dead silence. And she ended up by wagging her finger at us. And then she just turned around and walked away as though, "I'm finished with you." And she was.
You know, it's taken over the convention.
Good heavens.
Spreading like wildfire.
I am for Gore for president. I have made no commitments to anyone.
But you will campaign.
I will campaign. We will start with a clean slate and one white cat, which will symbolize this campaign.
Is there a possibility that if you are drafted, you would accept your cousin as the running mate?
He's such a wonderful vice president. I'll keep him there another 8 years.
When they're down there on the floor casting their votes for Gore, we don't know which Gore.
No.
Well,
don't spoil it.
Don't withdraw.
Oh, no. In 1960, I ran for Congress in upstate New York on the Democratic Liberal tickets. Watching Jack Kennedy, I was intrigued to observe firsthand a near contemporary doing what I'd always wanted to do, and I began to feel the political tug in myself.
Then we shall not be weary. Then we shall prevail.
Jack always charmed me, yet I thought him something of a lightweight politically, since he was pretty much what the sheltered son of a rich right-winger would be. But then, at the time, so was I. We were both unadventurous conservatives, interested in personal glory. In November, after he had won, the first play he came to see was The Best Man. And I wanted to see how he would take some of the marital discord stuff. But I stood at stage left and looked through this curtain. And I could watch his face on every single line. And when Jack was thoughtful, he'd do this. So he did a lot of tooth tapping. And although the play was a big hit, I did resent a number of reviewers couldn't believe that people would go in for such skullduggery, blackmail that goes on. And I knew, of course, that is exactly what has always gone on. Jackie used to mourn. She said, "You know, we spend all this money trying to find out things about the other side, and we never use it." She looked tragic at the thought of all that money wasted. This will be the last Broadway opening that I shall ever go to, certainly of mine. This is my 6th production on Broadway. It has immemorable, nostalgic quality.
Several years ago, your candidate, William Russell, had what is known as a nervous breakdown.
I know that.
He was raving mad for almost a year.
He was not raving mad. It was exhaustion from overwork.
That was the press release. The real story is right here.
I know the real story.
Then you know it's political dynamite. A full report on his mental condition. How his marriage was a phony, a political front.
I won't begin to speculate on how you came across all of this.
And all the big words are there. Manic depressive, paranoid pattern, attempted suicide.
He never attempted suicide.
I'm sorry, it says right here. See there? Suicidal tendencies.
We've all got suicidal tendencies, but he never tried to kill himself.
But the point is, he could.
I thought you said he did try.
I did not say he did, I said he could. And then all that combined with his playing around with women.
So what?
I suppose you find promiscuity admirable.
I couldn't care less. I was brought up on a farm, and the lesson of the rooster was not entirely lost on me.
Would it be possible to get you to sign this? And we're enjoying the play. Thank you for writing it.
Thank you. There he is. Well, how are you? Well, you made it. You made it.
Great.
I'm sweating eyes, you know, with the people losing their lines.
Nervous. But they're getting their laughs. It's good.
And they're warming up to it.
Thank you so much.
I see. You came here to make a deal with me.
No, I came here to talk.
Well, it makes perfect sense what you're doing, Bill. So, and I have no hard feelings. Really, I mean that. So don't be apologetic.
You have no feelings, I would say.
And perhaps you have too many. Perhaps you are too emotional. The report on your breakdown, it said you thought of committing suicide.
Who hasn't thought of it?
I never have. And I don't think a president should, no matter how tough the going.
You trying to tell me that you're trying to save the country from me? That you genuinely believe that I'm unstable?
Yes, I do. You just admitted you thought of suicide.
Well, Joe, if I'm unstable, why did you just offer me the ambassadorship to China?
And you look so fabulous on stage.
This is where I belong.
No,
Yes.
you came out very,
Sweetheart, it was so beautiful.
Oh, I'm glad.
Wonderful actors. We wonderful waited for production. you all evening.
Eli, was it worth it?
Oh my God!
I
yes.
thought so. Thank
Oh,
you.
Gore, it's so good.
such a good play.
It's always been an honor to claim relation with one of the great authors of the 20th century. So
Well, that's very well said, Miss Gore. I think that's a very profound sentiment.
I believe it. It's very true.
Just one more. Excuse me, Joe. Okay, here we go. Stop smiling. You're such a star. Oh!
Every time we're talking, we're on camera. I can't talk in a relaxed way.
Well, if you remember what Socrates said,
Socrates, right, just a minute.
The untelevised life is not worth living. Have my own TV crew at all times. By the early 60s, I had spent 10 years in television, theater, conventional politics. It was time to go back to novel writing. In 1962, Howard and I moved to Rome. We had a small penthouse on top of an old palace, not far from the Pantheon. And I found the Roman life was much more natural and more human. The greatest pleasure probably was the mornings I'd go to the Campo di Fiori, where you'd buy flowers, but if you came on a Tuesday, that's when the fresh produce comes in from the country and the fresh fish come in. and it is a cornucopia, paradise. And everybody mingled with everybody else. Everybody kept an eye out on everybody else. I was going to go finish the novel of Julian, which I'd begun years before. I had the American Academy Library at my disposal. I'd do my own research. I would certainly farm it out if I knew what I wanted. But it's not until you start researching do you realize what it is that you do want. Just looking for little bright glittering bits of porphyry and gold leaf to put together in a pattern.
My favorite novel of Vidal's is Julian, which is his first great historical novel. And in that book, it's a completely counterintuitive book to be writing. Here he was in the early 1960s, and he's writing about 4th century AD Rome, the Roman Empire in decline, the struggle of Christianity versus paganism. What could be more irrelevant? And yet, this empire, the Roman Empire, comes in some ways to stand for the American Empire. And he writes about the struggle between Christianity and paganism in a way that makes it clear that these are impulses that are continuing in the world today.
Suddenly, I was aware that someone was calling my name. Then, I don't know how, but I realized that it was the sun who had spoken. Huge and gold above the city, the sun reached out fiery arms to me. And with an astonishing, poignant sense of coming home, I plunged straight into the blazing light. That is how I became aware of the one God. In a dream, Helios Mithras had called out to me, and I had beheld, literally, the light. From that day on, I was no longer alone. The sun was my protector.
Julian was in favor of toleration. He said every religion will have its own opportunity to develop as it wants to. There will be no state religion. This created such rage in the Christian establishment, both Greek and Roman, that they were out to get him. So he was murdered by a Christian in battle. Then, to the amazement of the publishers who had advised against, who on earth wants a novel about a 4th century emperor, it became #1 bestseller in the United States, and I was back.
Ask people in England the name of top American writers, and they'll probably mention Hemingway or Norman Mailer or William Faulkner. Not many people are likely to say Gore Vidal, but in America, it's the name Gore Vidal that stirs the literary circles. He's a rather un-American American, cool, sophisticated, who writes about subjects not usually reckoned to go down with the American public, and then immediately turns them into bestsellers. He slaughtered a succession of American sacred cows in his novels, and his latest book is an even more unexpected subject for an American novelist, the life of the Roman Emperor Julian.
American writers have shied away pretty much from, say, dealing with power. Now, power, I tend to agree with Adler rather than Freud, that most people, it isn't love they want, it isn't even sex they want. What they really want is power over another person.
Which they get in emotional terms of.
Indeed. Power is a fascinating theme. This is one of the greatness of Shakespeare. Shakespeare really did very little on the subject of love when you think about it, and much, much more on simply the will to power in men, how it expresses itself, what we ought to do about it, how we respond to it, and I think that's been a theme, certainly in my work.
When we read Julian, we really are reading late 20th century America through the lens of 4th century Rome. It's interesting to think that Vidal began writing the American sequence with Washington, D.C. He published that in 1967. Just as the counterculture was coming into full swing. This was the moment in American history when people realized that there was a difference between the official version of events and what was really going on.
I ceased to be a conventional conservative at the time of the Vietnam War, which I took to be unjust, incomprehensible. We could never explain why we were there or what we were fighting for.
There are many acts which provoke, but if you're going to have freedom of assembly and freedom of speech, you must be able to say it. That is the whole point of this country. And once this is abrogated, then I think we might just as well stop these wars of freedom. What are we doing fighting in Vietnam if you cannot freely express yourself in the streets of Chicago? I assume that the point of the American democracy
And some
is
people
you can
were pro-Nazi,
express
too.
any
Some
point of
people
view
were
you want.
pro-Nazi.
Shut up a minute.
No, I won't.
And
Some people were pro-Nazi, and the answer is that they were well treated by people who ostracized them, and I'm for ostracizing people who egg on other people to shoot American Marines and American soldiers. I know you don't
As
care.
far as
because
I'm
you don't feel any sense
concerned,
of
the only sort
identification.
of pro-crypto-Nazi I can think of is yourself. Failing that, I would only say that we can't have
Now listen, you
the right of
stop
assembly.
calling me a crypto-Nazi.
Let's stop
or I'll
calling
slap
names
you in
and
your
let's get-
goddamn face, and you'll stay plastered.
Mr. Vidal, wasn't it a provocative act to pull down an American flag and put up a Viet Cong flag, even if you disagree with what the United States is doing?
It is not a provocative act. You have every right in this country to take any position you want to take because we are guaranteed freedom of speech. We've just listened to a rather grotesque example of it.
Now, let's not talk...
Vidal is a person that I think is looked to with a good deal of admiration, also a good deal of suspicion, and even distaste by certain people because of his political idiosyncrasies, his iconoclasm, and his rudeness. He's someone for whom provocation is everything.
I'd really like to get into a discussion with Gore. He's been saying absolutely unspeakable things about me. He's been acting even worse than he usually does as a polemicist.
Norman is taking everything too personally. This is something I care about. And he happened to be one of my examples of what was wrong with what the women's lib people would call sexism. He has come out firmly against masturbation. He has come out against contraception, against abortion. But you know, these things aren't personal.
Oh, I know they're
This
not.
to me is a position that I'm taking, that I have taken. I'm very serious about politics. I'm very serious about this kind of
No,
thing.
Gore, you're not. You've been in politics all your life. You've dabbled in it superbly well. I mean, you know, you made a marvelous race for Congress some years ago in New York. You worked very hard. I admired the way you worked at that time. You're a sort of you know, one of the wonderful things about you is that with all your sort of profound, essential right-wing snobbery, you become America's second or third or fourth most lovely liberal.
I think Gore does court controversy. He says very controversial things. He writes very controversial books. You read him about Abraham Lincoln and you wonder why Abraham Lincoln is the great man we all thought he was. Gore, for whatever reason, seems to take a perverse view of a great many icons. As if, wait a minute, let's take a look at this more carefully.
You see, the original Lincoln is so much more interesting than what the Carl Sandburgs and the national hagiographers, lovely word, meaning makers of saints, they've turned him into a saint. He was much more interesting than that. He was a tough, hard politician. And he was certainly the most brilliant man ever to be the president of the United States, and he was probably the most important man the last 200 years. Lincoln smashed up the old republic, reinvented it as a highly centralized militaristic state, which we still are. Part of our mythology, and this is the sort of thing that drove Aaron Burr crazy and drives me crazy. Oh, you see, he fought the Civil War to free the slaves in the South. Well, he didn't fight to free the slaves. He didn't care. Lincoln said, if I can preserve the Union by freeing all the slaves, I shall do so, though I don't have the power. If I can preserve the Union by freeing some of the slaves and not others, I will do so. If I can preserve the Union by freeing no slaves, I will free none. That's how good an abolitionist he was. He made himself dictator. He suspended habeas corpus. He shut down newspapers. He imprisoned anybody he felt like it without due process of law. And he became more and more fierce and more stern in the extreme measures that he took to smash the South to pieces so that this would never happen again.
God knows I have at least tried very hard to do my duty, to do right to everybody and wrong to nobody. There are those who say I prolong the war because I lust for power. Well, that is nonsense, as you know. I may once have wanted, even lusted for power, but all that has been burned away. There is nothing left of me, but there is still the president. He must be allowed to finish the work that he was chosen to do. So leave me in peace. Once that is done, you and your better man are welcome to my dangerous place.
I think that in a complex way, the book does show what might be called Vidal's cold and unloving admiration for Lincoln. His Lincoln is not a national myth or the beloved father Abraham or the martyr. He really does seem to be there, warts and all. His curious secular mysticism, his profound fatalism, his extraordinary political shrewdness, and deep understanding of how to manipulate others in order to secure his own power for what he took to be the purposes of the nation. That comes through very strongly in the book. I have good friends who are great admirers of Lincoln, including of Lincoln's own writing, who are very angry about the book. But I find myself very persuaded. It's a remarkably effective dramatic portrait, whether or not it is wholly true to a particular scholar's interpretation of the historical Lincoln.
You're already dealing on such quicksand when you come to history. So they have to begin again. Unfortunately, being a novelist, they say, oh, well, he's making it all up anyway. That's what a novel is. You see, it can't be true. It can't be true.
I do not think there's a role for blending fiction and history. History must establish itself on the basis of substratum of facts. But facts can carry you only so far. The facts you choose represent a pattern in your own mind. The movement from facts to interpretations is a very swift movement, and your general slant on life will control the facts that you make. Every man, even historians, are prisoners of their own experience. So that history ends up, as the great Dutch historian Peter Heil once said, history is an argument without end.
History as a discipline is all about the arrangement of facts. And the arrangement of facts has to do with fiction. What is fiction? If you look at the Latin word fictio, it simply means to shape. He's giving history a narrative shape so that we can understand it, so that we can see the story that leads to our present story. Gore's historical novels offer us a window into ourselves in a way of understanding who we are by understanding where we have been. That's what's so crucial. One of my favorite moments in all of Vidal, which explains him as a novelist and historian, is that final moment in Empire, when President Teddy Roosevelt is having a little tete-a-tete conversation with William Randolph Hearst, the founder of modern journalism, especially yellow journalism.
Roosevelt produced his most dazzling smile. I may be a hypocrite, Mr. Hearst, but I am not a scoundrel. I know, said Hearst with mock sadness. After all, I made you up, didn't I? Mr. Hearst, said the president, history invented me, not you. Well, if you really want to be highfalutin, then at this time and this place, I am history, or at least the creator of the record. True history comes long after us. That's when it will be decided whether or not we measured up, and our greatness or its lack will be defined. True history, said Hearst with a smile that was for once almost charming, is the final fiction. I thought even you knew that.
Well, that conversation pretty much took place. Hearst did come to the White House, and he did denounce Theodore Roosevelt. Biographies of each man include this collision. There's no typescript of what they said, but if you know the gist of what they had to say to each other and why they hated each other, and that Hearst, I have perhaps more perceptive than he was in real life about the goals of history, about what history is. But he's the man who said that if there is no news, invent it. And that if there is no war, you would try and get the United States into a war. So most of politics during my lifetime has been the rulers of the country getting the people excited enough to go fight in Europe in a war between France and Germany. That's World War I. Well, It was hard going. Suddenly, Hollywood appears, and everybody on Earth is watching the movies. Woodrow Wilson, at the time of the First World War, saw the uses of Hollywood. Here is an instrument. He was hell-bent on getting us into World War I. He was up against an isolationist press, Congress, people. He got hold of a great PR guy called George Creel, and he sent him as a sort of unofficial ambassador to Hollywood to make movies demonizing the Huns, the Germans. Woodrow Wilson himself appeared in 2 of these movies as Woodrow Wilson, shaking the hand of the hero or heroine. And then you see a title, I am President Wilson, I am happy to greet you, and that you are going to fight for freedom against the Hun. So he got his war. I've never liked Woodrow Wilson. This is a family dislike because of my grandfather's problems with him, and I took my grandfather's side. And I still don't much care for Wilson as president or in any other way. And yet when I came to write Hollywood, which, as I pointed out to somebody, is about Woodrow Wilson and Warren Harding and not so much about Hollywood, Wilson comes out of it very well. Because you have to become Wilson while you write him. And you see why he does certain things, or you think you see why he does certain things. And he imposes, the character imposes a kind of logic which impels you to be him and to argue his case. Outside political Washington, I have never known a world so completely obsessed with itself as Hollywood, making the marriage between movies and politics inevitable.
The fact that an entire story could so surround them, as a moving picture did, and so literally inhabit their dreams both waking and sleeping, made for another reality parallel to the one they lived in. For 2 hours in actual time, Caroline was 3 different people as a light shone through a moving strip of film. Reality could now be entirely invented and history revised. Suddenly she knew what God must have felt when he gazed upon chaos with nothing but himself upon his mind.
So how long were you in residence here?
I came out in 1954, and I was under contract to MGM, and a whole bunch of us came out from New York together. Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward, Anthony Perkins, and it was sort of a boarding house life, really. And then, of course, the greatest of all had a penthouse here. That was Greta Garbo.
These were better days, clearly.
They were more glamorous days, certainly. Well, this was very much the inspiration for Myra Breckinridge. Myra is a child of the movies. She really wants to soak herself in Hollywood in the great days. As you know, it is the story of a man who decides to become a woman, who then falls in love with a girl and decides to become a man again. I don't know where Myra came from. Myra's taste in movies are not my taste in movies. I was halfway through Myra Breckinridge before I realized that she had been a man. I had no idea that this was a transsexualist, except the dialogue kept going wrong for a woman. And I kept thinking, well, if Myra has her own voice, and I heard her voice walking along a Roman street. I am Myra Breckinridge, whom no man will ever possess. Clad only in garter belt and one dress shield, I held off the entire elite of the Trobriand Islanders, a race who possessed no words for why or because. Yonder bottle is where the Myra Breckinridge figure of a showgirl holding a cowboy hat revolved round and round and round. It was sort of a landmark. And then it was the logo of the book itself. And I think they used it in the film, which I never saw, as I have high blood pressure. Something like Meyer Breckenridge, which I wrote in maybe 4 weeks, it's a mystical experience. It's like automatic writing. You don't know what's going to come out. That really is startling. And it's not till you reread that you think, oh my God, is that what I was doing?
It's full of joy. It's full of a kind of wicked glee at everything it portrays, including its satirical portrait of various Hollywood figures. But its mockery also of gender roles has a kind of permanent pleasure built into it.
This is pure Vidal, but it's just pure America. This is what America is about, sex and power. Why he's so shocking to read, I think, and exciting to read, and offensive to so many people is, he's showing you how power really works.
The primary strength of Gore Vidal as a historical novelist seems to me to be his obsession with American power politics.
Are you there? Good to see you again. Well, there was a pattern for empire which I didn't understand when I began these 7 volumes of narratives of empire. And by the time I got to the last one, The Golden Age, it all starts to come together. I see that from the beginning that this was an inexorable pattern.
Alice was by far the best of the talking heads. Timothy filmed her last. Of course, Cousin Franklin is going to get us into the war over there so he can run for a 3rd term next year. 2 terms were good enough for my father, not to mention George Washington, and 2 terms more than enough for him, if not for the long, suffering American people. But, dramatically, she narrowed her gray-blue eyes. Let me tell you a secret. Franklin is very ambitious. There, I've given the game away. He wants to be president for life. And if it takes a war to keep him in the White House forever, a war we shall have.
I'll read a little sermon, but I will look up from time to time to give an air of spontaneity. In 1940, FDR had won a 3rd term because of his vow that no sons of yours will ever be called upon to fight in a foreign war, carefully adding, unless we are attacked. In which case, the war is no longer foreign, is it? In July 1941, he turned off Japan's oil supply while ordering Japanese troops to withdraw from the mainland of Asia. We, the people, were not informed of these provocations. The Japanese then sank our Pacific fleet at Pearl Harbor. Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war. Congress did. Unfortunately, in the process, the people were permanently excluded from governance. Although we have fought dozens of wars, hot and cold, since December 1941, none was declared by we, the people in Congress assembled, as the Constitution requires. After the surrender of Germany and Japan, there was a sharp disagreement. Should we stay armed to the teeth and police the entire world, or should we heed George Washington's farewell to the nation, which was then so eloquently restated by John Quincy Adams in 1821. And I quote from Mr. Adams, "America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. She well knows that she might become dictatress of the world, but she would no longer be the ruler of her own spirit." Needless to say, those who wanted us to become dictatress of the world won and still win in the conduct of our affairs. For a half century, there is no continent in which we have not looked for and found trouble. To watch the exclusion of the people from the democracy, as we called it, it wasn't quite one, but it was getting close, has been a tragic aspect of my life. It is so unlike what my grandfather's world.
This is the seventh and last novel in the series. You focused on certain eras and skipped over others in these books. Why this one, 1939 to 1954?
Well, I suppose that with the coming of the Second War, I really began about 1940. And Washington, D.C., I focused the same period, but on my fictional characters, a family. They're still in this book. But in the foreground are Franklin Roosevelt and Eleanor, Harry Hopkins. And it's how we got into World War II. I then move on to Harry Truman and the genesis of the Cold War and our responsibility for a great deal of it, and how at the end we become this global empire.
I read somewhere that America started out wanting to be like Greece and ended up like Rome. Is there a parallel between the Roman Empire and the American Empire?
You have the same problems of empire with every powerful country. Expansion is the game. A nation, a society, an empire is a tropism. And unless it is constantly feeding off things around it and expanding, generating energy, collecting energy, it begins to lose energy and finally ends cold and dead as a mackerel. So the Roman Empire ran into trouble. All the others have. We're running into it now.
I want to thank you for alerting me to something that Tolstoy said. History would be an excellent thing if it only were true.
Yes. That's why I think we must turn occasionally to a novelist to get at the truth.
And I want to thank you for doing it.
As for the human case, the generations of men come and go, and are in eternity no more than bacteria upon a luminous slide. And the fall of a republic or the rise of an empire, so significant to those involved, is not detectable upon the slide, even were there an interested eye to behold that steadily proliferating species, which would either end in time or with luck become something else, since change is the nature of life and its hope.